Welcome everybody to our March training webinar. We have a guest speaker today, Brett West. We've had him on before. Everyone loves having him on and loves the material that he shared. So he's kind of like the famous person we bring on board just when we need a celebrity into the month. Brett West is the man we call. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Brett. Brett's going to talk to us about the immune effects of Tahitian Noni Juice today. In light of all the things going on around the world, it's a very good time for us to be making sure people understand the studies behind Tahitian Noni and the importance of a good, healthy immune system. So thank you, Brett. It's on to you.
Thank you, Sarah. That was a very kind introduction. I'm happy to be here with you all today, at least electronically, and to talk to you about noni and the Tahitian Noni Juice and the benefits it is to our health. Of course, just some foundational things. The immune system is there to basically keep us alive. You know, there are things that our bodies are exposed to and that can harm us, and the immune system is what we have to defend ourselves against those invasions that would cause us harm or illness. With noni fruit, there's a long history of its use for improving health in the tropical areas of the world and in the South Pacific as well, specifically there. And there was a man named Art Whistler. He was an expert in Polynesian herbal medicine. He was affiliated with the University of Hawaii. He had a book that he had written called Polynesian Herbal Medicine, and he stated in there that noni was perhaps one of the most important plant prior to the European era for maintaining and helping health. Now, I had somebody ask me why not after the European era. Well, the Europeans, we brought in different things that kind of distracted them. And now they've turned back to that in more recent times. But that history had never fully gone away. There was a survey done through the University of South Pacific where they looked at some Pacific Islanders' perceptions on the use of noni, the noni plant, for health. And they interviewed people that were familiar with the traditional uses of the plants, as well as those who were the recipients of care from some of these, what we'd call traditional healers. And they looked at them in the rural settings and as well as in the towns and cities. And they had several benefits that people ascribed to the noni plant, and one of those included things that were related to our immune system and keeping a healthy respiratory system. And so that knowledge had never fully gone away, even with the advent and introduction of more Western-based type medicines. Now, there was work done by one of our colleagues, Dr. Johannes Westendorf. His wife was Cornelia Metlick. She was a medical doctor. He was, of course, a toxicologist and pharmacologist at the University of Hamburg in Germany. And they conducted a survey among European consumers of noni juice, Tahitian Noni Juice, mostly. And they had over 1,700 people that they had collected information from. Now, the immune system benefits was ranked among one of the top 5 effects that people experienced when using Tahitian Noni Juice. And so there's a good history and a wide recognition of noni's ability to help maintain a healthy immune system. So there's a little bit of an introduction there. One other thing I wanted to just bring up before I get into some other studies is a safety study of Tahitian Noni Juice that we did. In Europe, they passed a law in 1997, and they required all foods that were new to the European Union, those that didn't have a significant history of use prior to 1997, to undergo safety evaluations. We did a lot of research. Even though noni had been used as a food throughout the Pacific and in Southeast Asia and other places, it had been, some places it was even considered a delicacy. Depending on what your preference is for flavor, that you may or may not agree with that, but it certainly was used as a food. But we still had to go through this process of doing all the safety research And that included a human clinical trial where we had people drinking anywhere from 30 milliliters a day of Tahitian Noni Juice to 750 milliliters a day per month. And these people were generally healthy people. We wanted to see if we had to demonstrate that Tahitian Noni Juice wouldn't cause any harm. When you do these types of studies, you draw, of course, draw blood. You take blood pressure, the normal things. We even did electrocardiogram to look for heart function, make sure there was no anomalies there. But you also collect information on what are called adverse events. So if an adverse event would be something as simple as a headache or a cough or a cold or a pain in the side or anything that would be out of the ordinary of what we'd consider health, good health, you would record. And so in this study, we had a group that was a placebo group. They drank a fruit juice placebo, didn't have noni in it. And then we had these other groups of people drinking increasingly large amounts of Tahitian Noni Juice. And when the study was over and all the statistical analyses were completed, we found that the people drinking Noni Juice had fewer adverse events than those in the placebo group. And that was anywhere from 20 to 50% fewer adverse events, depending on the dose of Tahitian Noni Juice. And the adverse events that they had fewer of were things like headache and, things that would be indicative of respiratory problems. They were healthier. And we were doing this study to demonstrate lack of toxicity, lack of harm, but we actually found benefits in this study, seeing how this Tahitian Noni Juice improved the health of people compared to the placebo group. So that was a bonus finding for us, and that we weren't looking for, but we found. But it corroborates all the things I told you about, the traditional uses and the experience among the European consumers, and frankly around the world as well. I'm going to go and I mentioned some human studies. I'm going to talk a few animal studies. Some work that was done at the University of Wisconsin's veterinary medicine school here in the United States. That we had for a while there, we had some farmers and ranchers, people that worked with livestock that were interested in using natural products to keep their animals healthy. And we had some here locally in Utah, some ranchers that had tried using Tahitian Noni Juice and had explained they found some benefits from that in the health of their animals. So we actually supported some research done at the University of Wisconsin, and we did this with cattle, with cows, young cows, calves, Holstein, for those who are interested in the breed. But we took noni fruit puree, the kind we use to make Tahitian Noni Juice and Max and our products. That's our basic material. We harvest the noni fruit from different islands in French Polynesia, bring it all into Tahiti, and then turn it into a puree, removing the seeds, some of the skin, and turn it into a puree. That's our starting material. We used that in this study and gave it to these young calves, newborn calves, and in a few different studies. I'm going to talk about one to begin with that I guess I need to advance my presentation here, and I'll come back to that one there, that slide there, and explain what we did in China to get approval for Tahitian Noni Juice as an immune boosting product. But in this study here, 114 calves were enrolled in this study, and they were being raised on a farm that had a problem with salmonella infections. And they would go through and try to clean this up, but it was pretty fastidious. They had a hard time getting rid of it, so it impacted the health of these animals. And they thought this would be a good farm to try this with. So these animals received you can see here, either 0 or 15 or 30 milliliters of noni puree twice a day for 3 weeks, and then were observed until weaning, which is another 3 weeks afterwards. And by the time they had been weaned from their mothers, they were about 80 kilograms. So just to give you an idea of the dose. So 80 kilograms, that's the size of a lot of adults. Human adults would be that size. And they're getting doses that would be equivalent similar to what we'd be drinking with our juice, Tahitian Noni Juice. But one thing that they found at the end of this study is that the respiratory and gastrointestinal health scores, which is based simply on the number of symptoms they had and how many times they required some kind of medical attention, either for respiratory infection or some problem like scours. That's a kind of a diarrhea that cattle have. That every time they have an incident, they're scored and they get a number assigned to that depending on the frequency. So they compared that and among the groups. So here's what we see here. So the respiratory score you see here at weaning, those that didn't receive any noni puree, they had a score of 18. It was essentially the same with 15 mils of noni puree. It was 19, so that's statistically the same thing. But you see by 30 mils here, the respiratory scores went down quite a bit. It was a very significant decline. And the GI health scores also declined. And again, the score means the lower number, the better the health, the fewer incidents. And so you see there's a big decline, dose-related decline here in GI problems in these animals. So we see something going on here with these large animals, and just having a small amount of noni puree, especially early in life, and improving their life and their health there. So that was a significant finding. They published that in a couple different journals. I give one source down there at the bottom that they published this in. Now, there was a second study done with calves. And again, now this one was simply to, remember the previous study involved this bacterial infection, and they had this problem on the farm. So in this one, what they did is they drew blood from the cows. So now when they're born, these animals receive medications, they get blood drawn to check their health. There are all kinds of things with these commercial operations. So you have this ready to examine sample, since it's already going to be taken from these animals anyhow. But instead we had one group where they were given noni puree for a couple of weeks, and blood samples were collected on day 0, the day they're born, and day number 3 days of life, 7, and then 14 days, 2 weeks after birth there. And then what they did is they took these blood samples and incubated them in the presence of E. coli and another bacteria as well. And now in your blood, you have white blood cells, and there's a certain group called phagocytes, and they attack and basically kill bacteria. That's one of the ways you defend yourself when you have a bacterial infection. And so what they did is they evaluated the kill rate, basically, of the whole blood from these animals against these bacteria, and then compared it to the controls, which didn't receive any noni fruit puree. Now here's a graphic from the paper from Journal of Veterinary Internal Medicine, and this is what we call a box and whisker plot comparison. But basically, just look at you can see how the range here, it represents a range. You see that difference in percent kill increases each day in the animals that were fed the noni compared to those who didn't get any noni fruit at all, any noni fruit puree. And you see that there was an increase, statistically significant by after 14 days of life and having the noni fruit puree, that their immune system activity against these bacteria had improved over time. So again, scientist, I like to see these effects over time, and also these dose-related ones. They show that something's really going on. And this matches up with the human experience that I talked about earlier. Just yet another little educational piece here on the immune system. There's 2 general parts of the immune system, or responses. One is called the innate immune system, or innate immunity. And that's what I talked about with these phagocytes, and also involves something called natural killer cells. They will attack viral cells that have been infected with viruses and kill them so they can't replicate and spread further. And that's the part of the immune system that's ready to defend the body immediately, act right away. That's called the innate immune system. It's ready to go. There's another part called the adaptive immune system, and it is one that involves learning how to respond. So it involves production of antibodies, activation of things called T cells. This is the part when you get an immunization, that's what is involved here is the adaptive immune system. That's the part that has a memory to it, and you have a previous exposure, and then the next time you see that antigen again, that thing that's going to invade your body, it'll be ready to respond then because your body has adapted or your immune system is adapted to that threat. So remember those two things there. And that'll help explain this study we did in China at Tianjin Medical University. This was part of a program when we opened up the market in China to Tahitian Noni Juice. We had to do all the safety testing as we did in Europe. And of course, the Chinese government was interested in what we had done in Europe previously as well, but they also wanted us to do additional work in China. And then the Tahitian Noni Juice, we were registering it as something called a functional food. So at the time, we needed to demonstrate that Tahitian Noni Juice, to be sold the way we were selling it, that it had to do something to improve health. So there were a number of categories we could register in, and tests that they had prescribed that they say you take your product you're trying to register, you must do these specific tests that we have approved and demonstrate that there is an effect. And then you can submit all the data to the government, and then they will review it and approve it. So kind of their agency that oversees medicines and healthy foods and so forth will review that. So we had actually done this for the immune system. We also did it for antioxidant properties, and there were effects with both of those functions, which is of course obvious based on all the other research we did. But in China, we picked one because they say you got to pick one. So we went with the immune system benefit for China, and they approved us and approved Tahitian Noni Juice as something that helps boost the immune function. And then there's a little symbol. It's called a blue hat symbol, not in Mandarin, but when we talk about it in English, it looks kind of like a little blue hat, and it's on our label there in China, and that it tells the consumer that you can take this product to help support your immune system or boost your immune function. As part of that project, we did this trial, human study here at Tianjin Medical University. And this was a smaller one. We had not quite as many as in the safety study I was telling you about, but we had a dozen people, and they drank 330 mils of Tahitian Noni Juice for 8 weeks. And we drew blood from these people. We measured a number of things, but the two that I'm going to highlight today are the markers for immune function, which is something called IL-2, a marker for adaptive immune function. So again, that's the part that adapts and learns how to respond. And then a marker for innate immune function, which is natural killer cell activity. And those measurements were made before the study began and then after they had been drinking Tahitian Noni Juice for 8 weeks. Now, what we saw with natural killer cell activity, this is part of the innate immunity, the part that's ready to go. We saw there's about a 30% increase in both of these measurements. But natural killer cell activity, again, after drinking Tahitian Noni, you saw a significant increase in that. And the interesting thing about natural killer cells, their functions, again, are to attack virus-infected cells and destroy them so the viruses can't spread. And that's an important thing as people know are talking about today. Then the other marker was IL-2, the adaptive immunity. IL-2, what it does is it stimulates the T cells and B cells work together to produce antibodies, and also it'll stimulate the natural killer cells to become active, among other things. And so that's an important function there in helping maintain that memory of when the next time you're exposed to a virus or something else. And that was increased significantly also, approximately 32% with these two measurements here. So we see this not only with these traditional uses or a survey where people felt they were feeling better, but we can actually measure it here in the human trials. Now, this was followed up later on. So we did that study back in 2008, and then about 5 years later, we supported some work at Kinki University in Osaka, Japan. And in this study, this was sort of a follow-up to what was done previously, this human trial, to the previous human trial, but this involved mice with weakened immune systems. And again, the noni fruit puree from French Polynesia, our puree that we use in our products, was given to the researchers at this university, and they made extracts with it so they could test various extracts. And they found that the noni fruit extract was able to improve the immune function of these mice with a weakened immune system. And then they also isolated something called D-acetyl asparaglucidic acid. That's the major iridoid in noni fruit. We've talked about iridoids before, the phytonutrients in noni fruit, the main one, the one that's in the highest concentration. They isolated that and tested that one directly as well. So they tested an extract from noni fruit puree and then also the main phytonutrient in noni fruit. And then they compared that again with one group received these treatments and another group did not receive it, so they could see if there was any effect occurring from noni and its major iridoid. So as we saw with the human studies, there was an effect on IL-2 levels. And you can see here in this bar graph here, just notice in the green bars there, increasing doses, larger doses of the noni extract increased the IL-2 production in these mice. And then the DAA, the same thing, a dose response, meaning more DAA, the higher the IL-2 production. Again, that's an important part of adaptive immunity. And with natural killer cell activity, the same thing. Increasing amounts of noni extract improved what we call the cytotoxicity, or that ability of the natural killer cells to kill cells that are infected. And the same with DAA. Increasing amounts improved the activity of the natural killer cells. And those were all statistically significant differences. So there's a suite of research that we have conducted to demonstrate the benefits of Tahitian Noni Juice on the immune system and helping maintain healthy immune function, helping boost immune function. I'm going to go back to that previous slide I showed you here. This, for those of you who can read Mandarin, maybe you can see this here, but this is the certificate we were given by the government in China to make this claim on immune function with Tahitian Noni Juice. Again, that was the culmination of a few years of research and a heavy investment from our company to demonstrate the benefits of something that we kind of already knew. Many people already knew this, but we were able to demonstrate that with scientific research. So that's the gist of it.
Brett, do you mind if I ask you a question?
No problem.
The Chinese research, we did actually share that in our Facebook group, in our private group.
Okay.
A good response back or question back was that it was based on quite a large amount of drinking the juice at the time, right? And I know that we have got other studies that showed the immunity boost on drinking less than that. But would it be almost logical, or would it be silly for me to say that during times of stress or times of concern for your health, that maybe that is the time that you do increase the amount of noni juice you drink, and during other times then you could be doing the normal 60 or 30 mil? What are your thoughts there? Do you know where I'm going with that? Like, I'm sort of trying to...
Well, that's what I do.
Yeah.
So that 330 mils, that's just that's a glass, a glass and a quarter, glass and a half, depending on how big your glass is, of Tahitian Noni Juice a day.
Yeah.
And I know not everybody wants to drink that much, but that's what I do. We've seen these effects, like I mentioned, that safety study.
Yeah.
We saw improved benefits in the reduction of those adverse events with the higher doses of noni. In that study we did in China, if you want, we chose those doses because we could have gone with a whole lot more, but we had this was sort of the end of the project, and we were trying to maximize or utilize our resources as best as possible with just the one study. So finishing up that project there. but you can get benefits. One thing that I bring up here on lower doses, though, you've heard me talk before about these studies we did in the United States at the University of Illinois College of Medicine, where people drank Tahitian Noni Juice who were heavy smokers. They smoked 19 or more cigarettes a day. And we were able to draw blood and measure the DNA damage in white blood cells and see how Tahitian Noni Juice reduced the amount of DNA damage. And the white blood cells are part of the immune system. These natural killer cells, all these other ones are part of that. And so the lymphocytes, we call them lymphocytes, the lymphocytes were protected by Tahitian Noni Juice from the damage caused by cigarette smoke. Now, not everybody's a cigarette smoker, but a lot of that stuff in the cigarette smoke is just in the air anyhow, in the cities, just in different concentrations. So we're able to show how Tahitian Noni Juice impacts the immune system that way by protecting it from toxins, basically, in the environment. So that would also have a benefit in protecting your immune system so it can do its job well. And those were done, our small dose there was 30 milliliters, and it was quite effective just with 30 milliliters a day.
Yeah.
In those extreme conditions.
So another question, and I emailed you this one, but I'll ask it to you now. One of our IPCs wanted to know if drinking max, because if we measure or we talk about the level of iridoids in our products, she wanted to know if she drank max, would that be better than her drinking her Tahitian Noni Juice because of the iridoid content or what level?
Yes. So the purpose in creating max was to increase iridoid content because we had done this work and we saw that the iridoids are effective. And I explained this study to you in Japan where increasing doses of DAA, the main iridoid in noni fruit, improved activity. So I would say yes. The research that we had done with the human studies was done with Tahitian Noni Juice specifically. But we have done studies with max related to antioxidant function and some other things where we saw, improved effects compared to Tahitian Noni Juice. So yeah, max is an option for you to use as well.
Okay.
But again, Tahitian Noni Juice is effective. Max is a stronger, kind of a little bit of a stronger version of that.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. Well, you've run almost perfectly on time, Brett. I'm very.
Okay. All right, great. Okay, well, thanks for having me share this with you, and hope it's helpful to you.
No, we appreciate it, and if we get any questions from it, we'll reach out to you and send those questions over. So if anyone does have a question, please message me, and we can ask Brett that, and we'll go from there. But thank you very much for your time, Brett.
Okay, have a good day.
You take care.
Okay, bye-bye.